Hey guys, I'm doing this video just for clients, and I wanted to share some thoughts about what happened with the Surfside building collapse down in Miami and what I've seen lately when it comes to questions about that, what impact that has on reserve funding, what impact that has on budgeting, what could possibly happen legislatively as a result of that, and just sort of provide a framework for how to consider what happened in that admittedly extreme situation with what tends to happen at times, especially as buildings age. The condo buildings here, your newest building, so to speak, for all practical purposes, was largely built in 05, 06, 07. So even those buildings are now starting to reach 15, 16 years old, starting to have some repair issues, let alone the ones that were built in the 80s and 90s, or goodness knows if they're built in the 50s and 60s. We've got some real, usually have some long-standing maintenance issues. But with that said, I mean, what happened in Miami is absolutely tragic. It's unbelievable that an association, a building, can get to the point where it literally collapses. But I can see how it happens. I don't mean that in a bad way, but I can absolutely see a situation where the maintenance obligations get so much and so expensive that the association ends up, or the board at that point, effectively ends up punting on the decision. And while obviously I wasn't in the board meetings, but I have been following the situation and seeing what comes out in the news and things like that. And I can make some assumptions from parallels that we see at meetings, across the panhandle. And that is that I guarantee this issue was not new to the association, that this had been on their radar for a long, long time. And my guess is that when they realized what the issue was, and they probably went out and got an estimate for what it would take to address it, and it was astronomically expensive. I've heard different numbers that at one point it was 5 or 10 million, and then it was 20 and maybe 30, but whatever it was, I promise you that it started off at a smaller number than what it ended up would have been at the end had they done it like right before the building collapsed. And the reason why I mention that is because you see that in situations around here where you have a major issue, it gets brought to the board's attention, the board brings it up, or you've got deferred maintenance, or you've got underfunded reserves, or for some reason you've got a major issue and not a lot of money to solve the problem, right? And that issue gets presented to the owners, and you've got a group of owners that are in there for the long-term issues and want to start saving up money for it, or want to start addressing the problem and fixing it so that it doesn't continue to happen down the road. Probably the majority of owners, or close to half. You've got some other ones that think, man, this kind of stinks and I don't want to have to pay this, but it is what it is. And then you always have this small minority, albeit very, very vocal minority of owners that say, we can't do this, I can't afford it. If you special assess this amount, or you you increase the assessments, I'm not going to be able to afford it. I'm going to lose my unit. I can't make the debt service payment on it, and everything bad's going to happen. And it tends to be that this very small vocal minority of people ends up creating enough pressure for the board to punt on it, or perhaps put a Band-Aid on the problem and not actually solve the problem. And then I guarantee you what happens is that issue does not get better over time. It gets worse over time. And when you were getting pushback at that, let's just say $5 million issue, when that issue becomes 8 and 10 and 12 and 15 and 20, the gap almost becomes insurmountable. And then at that point, what I bet you happened was, instead of discussing how to solve the problem, and let's come up with a solution and how are we going to save for this and how are we going to do it, it became a big blame game. It became a situation of, if you guys would have addressed this back in 2012 when it was a $5 million problem, we wouldn't be in this situation. Why weren't you saving up for this? I'm going to come after you. If you guys don't fix this, it's going to be on you. And then at that point, you just reach this stalemate of no action, and then eventually, in the absolute extreme circumstances, the building literally falls down. Now, I'm not aware of buildings around here that are on the verge of collapse. I've got some buildings that need more maintenance than others, obviously, but and I'm not trying to be the sky is falling, oh my gosh, every building's going to fall down. It's not. But I think the spirit of what happened and how it ended up happening can be applied to a lot of other communities locally here. So the moral of the story and why I'm presenting this is one is, as a board, you've got to make decisions that are perhaps unpopular for the long-term interests of the community. And that's particularly hard in a lot of the local condo buildings because not in a bad way, but people are so short-term oriented. These are investment properties. They're cash flow oriented. They're probably going to only own them for a few years. I literally had a meeting the other day where an owner said, I'm not worried about funding the roof. I'm not going to be here in 10 years. Well, I appreciate the position, but you should pay for your portion of using the roof while you own the unit. So if the roof needs to be replaced in 10 years, but you're only going to own it for 3 years, you should pay for your 3 years use of the roof and not just punt on it and then say, sorry guys, whoever owns it on that 10th year, you're going to get hit with a massive special assessment. So that's the first thing, is you've got to look at the long-term health of your building and long-term decision making and vote in the best interest of the community membership as a whole, as opposed to what's probably that one vocal owner or very small group of owners that are vocal about this, so that you can make good decisions for the long-term health of your building. So that's one. Number two is, anytime we have these situations where you have a problem that's a legacy problem or getting worse, there's a tendency to blame the people in the past, to say, well, they didn't fund for this, so why should I? It is what it is. You have a deck of cards that you've been dealt, and the sooner that, as a board and an organization and an ownership and a management team, that you can start saying, we can complain all we want about the actions of prior boards, but the reality is we have this amount of money and we have this problem coming up in a few years, and we need to solve this problem. I can't solve the problem of why we don't have enough funds now. So let's figure out what the problem is now and figure out how to move going forward. And then the biggest part of that is, how do we stop the problem from getting any worse? So I'd strongly suggest you say, once you can focus on dealing with the problem as it faces you today, like dealing with reality on reality's terms, then one is, before we start saying, okay, we're going to save up for this in the next 18 months and it's all going to be fine, because you're not going to do that. You just can't, from a political standpoint, accomplish that all at once. Figure out what you can provide to your ownership to stop the problem from getting any worse. So stopping the gap between what you have and what you need from continuing to increase. Now, and when I say that continues to increase, the literal gap between we have zero money and we need $10 million within a given period of time, that difference is going to stay the same. But what you can start to do is saying, because time ticks away. So you may have 10 years now, well, next year you're going to have 9 and 8 and 5, and you'll have a much shorter time to make up for that budget shortfall. So at least start putting some money towards the process now, so that the problem doesn't continue to get worse. So that would be my second advice, is stop the problem from getting any worse. Third is communicate. Tell the owners what's going on. Tell them what they can expect. Tell them this is coming down the road. Tell them that in the next few years, you're probably going to get an increase in assessments. You're probably going to have to increase the reserve requirements. You're probably going to have to special assess some amount. You have to start preparing them for this so they can get prepared fiscally for it. Honestly, some may end up selling their unit, and that's okay. But I guarantee you those people would have been in a better position at Surfside had they sold or had they started saving, rather than letting the building collapse. And I'll say it again, I know this is an extreme example, but I'm just saying hopefully that makes sense as far as like a long-term, what could eventually happen. So tell them what's going on, tell them again, and everything you can say, here's a problem that we are trying to address, and get ready because it's coming. So that would be number 3. And then number 4 is create the plan and execute on it. So once you know, all right, this isn't getting any worse, we've told the owners what's coming down the road, that they need to start saving up some money for it, then start figuring out how you're going to save and what you're going to do. You have various options. You can start fully funding the reserves again. You could perhaps look at a special assessment. You could perhaps build it in your operating budget. There's a bunch of different ways that you can do that, and that's going to be certainly case by case. But having that plan and then executing on it is the final step. And once you've started saying, it's not getting any worse, we're trying to fix this, we've told you for several months or years or quarters or whatever it is, this is coming down the road, and now here we are, and we're going to finally execute on it. I think that's the way you dig out of this hole. And it's a very real problem. It happens a lot. Not the collapse part, obviously, but the underfunding, the consequences of what happens when an association doesn't fully fund reserves. That has to get caught up at some point. The roof's still going to have to get replaced, even though you haven't been funding reserves. You're still going to have to repaint the building. You're still going to have to redo the paving. Like, all that stuff's going to happen. It's a certainty. So the sooner you can start dealing with those things and having those kind of uncomfortable conversations, and then ultimately, if you don't have the political backing, at least you did what you could to try to explain to the association that you're trying to put the long-term interest first. You have to make these tough decisions, and you've got to vote for what you think is in the best interest of the community as a whole, as opposed to what a couple of vocal minority owners that perhaps or maybe can't afford the units and can't afford the maintenance responsibilities. I think you'll be in a much, much better spot. So I hope they can figure it out. The last thing is, legislatively, there's almost certainly going to be something that happens in this legislative session to address this. If nothing else, from a political standpoint, they got to say that they did something. My prediction is that it's going to be something related to inspections regarding the structural integrity of a building after a certain age, whether it's 30 or 40 years. You're probably going to start having to get some kind of structural engineering studies on a 3-year basis, kind of like you have to do on appraisals. Every 3 years, you're supposed to get the building reappraised, so it's probably going to be similar to that. I don't know what the legislature intends to do with, once you get those results, say the results come back as something that's not good. What are the consequences of that? Then do you have a legal requirement to fund reserves? Is there some kind of like trigger where if you find out that you're so far underfunded, you have to do certain things? I don't know how they're going to solve that. So keep an eye out for that. I will be watching it. It'll be interesting to see what they try to do to accomplish that. And I wish you guys the best. Thanks.